promo code WORST15 to get 15% off.
The story you are about to hear may contain detailed descriptions of intense violence. It will certainly be worse than fiction.
Hello, my name is Les. Thank you for joining me as we take a look at a true tale of unimaginable horror. First of all, I want to thank everyone for hanging in there while I took some time to kind of restructure the show a little bit. You won't hear a huge difference, but I'm going to be doing more of the background music myself, weaving it in with the story to make it fit the direction the show is going. Hopefully I'm not terrible at it. I'm not going to lie though, it is a lot of work, which may slow down episode releases to every 3 weeks or maybe even monthly. Time will tell. I've also been working on getting good sound from some new equipment and new recording software, which is a much more daunting task than it sounds, but enough about that. I hope everyone listening is keeping themselves and their families safe in this strange moment in history. There aren't many out there who are alive today that have experienced a global pandemic, and as you're probably well aware, panic has set in and it's becoming a nightmare to find basic necessities in a lot of places. My wife isn't able to work for now since salons were shut down, but at least I am. I think we'll manage to get through this and see better days in the near future, though. It still hurts. That income is extremely important for us. We've got this, but you're not here for my current life story, and before we get into the tale of horror I have for you, I want to play a promo for a podcast that I'm a fan of. It's called Crime Grapple from a man by the name of Dan Kelton. If thoroughly researched stories told in a Scottish accent are your thing, then his podcast is definitely for you. If worse than fiction is your thing, well, True Crime Grapple is right up your alley.
Hey legends, what's happening? This is Dan from the True Crime Grapple podcast, putting out a call to you to come over and give us a go. We're approaching our second year of doing this. We love what we do, and you'll find a pretty solid product in a storytelling format, well researched and written, with some cool music thrown in. We've got a webpage over at www.truecrime-grapple.captivate.fm, where you can have access to all of our archives, and all of our social media links are on there as well. We're also available to subscribe to on just about everywhere you listen to pods on. So check us out. That's the True Crime Grapple podcast, and let us feed your morbid curiosity.
As always, I'll drop a link in the notes of this episode. You'll definitely want to check his show out. He has a pretty good sized catalog of episodes to binge. A lot of people at some point in their life have probably wondered what human meat tastes like, as morbid as that thought is. Thankfully, only a small number of people actually find out firsthand, but those who have, almost universally compare it to pork or veal. It's probably also reasonable to assume that those who have tasted human flesh actually knew what they were eating. Is it possible, though, that some of us have eaten it without knowing? Perhaps we went down to a local barbecue joint and got a pork sandwich or a steak burger that was prepared by a serial killer who got great satisfaction from watching people dispose of his victims' bodies unaware. Not only do I think it's possible, I believe that it has likely happened many times throughout history. This story is about a big man called Tiny, who claims to have done just that, and whether it's true or not, he was indeed a serial killer who is believed to have killed no less than 4 people, but confessed to several more than that. Whether his confessions were true may never be confirmed and might simply be the boasting of a man who seemed to enjoy talking about killing. Whatever the case may be, there are many what the fuck moments in this case, which was suggested by my wife, by the way. So without further ado, let's get into today's story. I hope you enjoy, if that's the right word for it. On the evening of December 8th, 1996, Rita Kemper found herself running across the storage yard of Joe Stein & Son Pallet Company in Baltimore, Maryland. She was being chased by a man who had befriended her and enticed her to accompany him to the small trailer he was living in with a promise of drugs. It wasn't unusual. She had partied with him before, drinking and doing cocaine, but this time was different. He got her high, then forced himself on her. She stood practically no chance of fighting him off, as he was much larger than her. An imposing figure that stood around 6'1" and weighed almost 300 pounds at that time. All he had to do was shift his weight against her, and there wasn't much she could do. He hit her a couple of times and demanded sex, and he wasn't about to offer any other choices. She said, whatever Tiny wanted to do that night, he was going to do. Tiny was the nickname of the giant man who lived in that trailer, but his real name was Joe Metheny. Somehow she managed to wiggle her way free from his clutches and get out of the trailer, but the storage yard of the pallet company was closed off with high fences and the gate was locked. She was stuck, and Tiny was able to close the gap, and when he reached her, he slammed his fist into her face, then choked her into submission and dragged her by her hair back to the trailer. He assaulted her again and held her down while pulling on her pants. Rita began praying out loud, but Joe scoffed in a sarcastic manner. "Even God can't help you. When I'm done, I'm going to kill you and bury you in the woods with the other girls." Rita, however, wasn't about to go down without a fight. Once again, she managed to free herself from Joe's grasp and scrambled her way out of the trailer through a window. She spotted a stack of pallets up against the fence and scurried up as fast as she could. Tiny was already upon her before she reached the top, and he had almost gotten a grip on one of her feet, but she was able to shake him and jump over the barbed wire top fence. She ran along the road as fast as she could, and by some amazing stroke of luck, the first car she spotted was a police cruiser. Just a few minutes later, Tiny was confronted near the gate by the officer, still holding Rita's pants, and was arrested without incident. In a letter he wrote in prison some years later, he said, "I turned around for a split second, and that was my mistake, for she ran out the door before I could get to her." He was booked into jail and charged with assault, kidnapping, and attempted rape, and was released the next day. Wait, what? Why the hell would someone charged with those offenses be OR'd out so fast? This, after all, wasn't Big Tiny's first run-in with the law for serious crimes. Even if his record was clean, though, who in their right mind would approve the release of someone who is potentially dangerous? Yeah, he was supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but shouldn't it at least get to the hearing stage before a possible release? I don't understand it. Either way, though, it happened, and Joe was laughing it up in his favorite bar later that night. About that criminal record, though. You see, Joe had numerous criminal charges that racked up over the years, mostly considered minor, but just a year and a half before the attack on Rita that would have undoubtedly ended in her premature death, Joe Metheny faced charges for the double murder of Randall Brewer and Randy Piker, both 33 years old and living in a homeless community under the Hanover Street Bridge in Baltimore. Both men had been savagely hacked to death with an axe and left laying on a mattress. The bodies were found on August 2nd, 1995, and I'm not sure how Joe was connected to the murders, but ultimately, he was acquitted of the charges due to a lack of physical evidence linking him to the brutal crime. Furthermore, on the same day, the same axe had been taken by Larry Amos to kill Everett Dowell, who also lived in the homeless community in the area. Amos pled down to manslaughter and served only 1 year in prison for killing someone with an axe. Metheny was actually known to hang out in the homeless communities in town, enlisting the services of the prostitutes and drug dealers that were easy to find. Big Tiny spent 18 months in jail awaiting the trial that ultimately saw him free to do as he pleased for the foreseeable future. A short time later, Tiny would confess to the double murder, but wouldn't be charged again for the crime. This came after another brutal attack and a mistake that Joe made, which would bring about his downfall. The night after the attack on Rita, as I said, Joe was back at the Borderline bar drinking Southern Comfort and telling jokes as if nothing serious had happened the day before. Also at the bar was another regular patron and friend of Joe's, William Ashbrook Jr. They both worked at Joe Stein and Son Pallet Company and hung out at the Borderline together frequently. Joe Metheny was a forklift driver and was allowed to live in the small trailer on the lot rent-free in exchange for keeping an eye on the place. The two drank for a few hours, then headed to the trailer so they could rail a few lines of cocaine. At some point, Joe told William, "I need to move a body." William thought it was a joke, but he would find out, to his horror, that just wasn't the case. Joe took him out to a wooded area near the trailer and began digging through a pile of trash, old tires, and other material to reveal the naked, decaying body of a woman. For obvious reasons, William wanted nothing to do with it, instead offering to get more cocaine, which Joe agreed to. Upon return from the run, Joe had already moved the body. William brought it up to Joe the next day, but he acted like he knew nothing about it when asked what he did with her. Rightly so, William began to worry that perhaps he could be next. He knew too much and hadn't participated, so Joe could be looking to get rid of William. He was a liability. Wisely, William went to the police with the information a week later. The Joe Stein and Son Pallet Company had a Christmas party for employees on December 15th, 1996. Earlier that day, William had shown up to report what he saw to local authorities. Police cased the scene, and as the party dissolved, they confronted Tiny, along with Joe Stein, and arrested both. Upon searching the trailer and the area around it, they found the body of Kimberly Spicer, who was either 23 or 26 years old, depending on which source you read, wrapped in a tarp not more than 10 feet away from the trailer he was living in. She had been reported missing by her mother on November 11th. Joe Stein was also arrested on allegations of disposing of evidence, though nothing came of it. Within a couple of hours, Tiny would find himself in an interrogation room sitting across the table from Baltimore Detective Homer Pennington. During that interrogation, Metheny spilled the beans almost without hesitation. Along with Spicer, Tiny also confessed to 2 other murders: 28-year-old Tony Ingracia, whose body was found a year prior near an interstate highway close to the pallet company, and Kathy Ann Magaziner, a 39-year-old prostitute who worked the streets in the area. Later on down the road, the confessions would continue and his claimed body count would rise to double digits. We'll get into that a little bit later, though. Kim Spicer had issues just like many of us do. She was young and had fallen into a vicious cycle where she struggled with a crack addiction and sold her body to pay for the habit. Her mother said Kim had her problems, but she was a battler, always struggling with her problems and hoping to turn the corner. I guess that's the kind of person he preyed on. She would be here, clean my house for me, and go to church with me. She did good for a while, but she was weak and gave in to temptation. Tiny victimized those on the margins of society, believing that no one would miss them and nobody cared about them. Kim's sister Connie worked at the Borderline bar for a time before Kim's death and later said he was so mannerly, saying thank you and please all the time. My sister once even said to me she felt sorry for him. Kim was a perfect target for Tiny. She is exactly what he would look for in a victim. She had gotten into an argument with her mother on the night of her murder and stormed out of the house. At some point later that evening, whether it was at the bar or while on the street, she encountered Metheny, who offered drugs to the young woman. They went back to his trailer where Metheny would ultimately stab her to death, no doubt sexually assaulting her beforehand. Blood was later found in the trailer. Kim was reportedly stabbed over 20 times in the face and chest after Joe made sexual advances on her, which she refused. He was jacked up on cocaine and Southern Comfort and flew into a rage. Later in court, it would come to light that Metheny had sexually abused her body after death and had forced a beer bottle into her vagina. Joe would later say to the jury, "When the autopsy was performed, they discovered she gave birth to a 12-ounce bouncing baby beer bottle. I get a kick out of every fucking time I say that. Bouncing baby beer bottle." The judge who oversaw the trial apologized to her family for having to endure the gruesome details of what happened. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for her murder. Curiously, Tiny didn't fit the usual mold that most brutal murderers and serial killers are made in. He had told everyone he knew that his mother was dead, but that simply wasn't the case. He also told stories of how he was neglected and lived a rough childhood, an account that his mother would deny. Joe's father died in a car accident when he was only 6 years old, and his mother raised him and his 5 siblings alone. She worked several jobs at once, and maybe she wasn't always home, but she single-handedly provided everything the family needed without public assistance. According to her, Joe was a good kid growing up, an above-average student who got along well with others and was well-mannered. She said he was smart and had a good childhood. If he was neglected, it was his own fault. It was a pretty good home. Joe dropped out of school in 8th grade and earned a GED. At 18, Joe enlisted to serve in the U.S. Army and claimed to have completed a tour of duty in Vietnam in an artillery unit, a claim that some who knew him have disputed. After leaving the Army, his mother said he just kept drifting further and further away. "I think the worst thing that ever happened to him was drugs. It's a sad, sad story." Joe spiraled into drug abuse and addiction and racked up numerous arrests in the years that followed. Eventually, he gained stable employment at the Joe Stein & Son Pallet Company, where he maintained a job for several years. until his arrest for the axe murders of the two homeless men. Leading up to those crimes, Tiny apparently had settled down, gotten married, and fathered a son. His wife also fell into addiction, but at some point must have been fed up with the life, so she took their son and left him. This, according to Joe, was when he lost his humanity and no longer cared for the lives of others. Dark times for Big Tiny, so he wandered the streets and spent his days among the homeless communities in and around Baltimore. He believed that his wife and son must be living among the encampments under the bridges and in the alleyways of the city, and kept his eyes peeled while enlisting the services of drug peddlers and sex workers that were woven into the underground society. He was able to work at the pallet company by day and roam the streets by night, keeping stable income while also living a nomadic lifestyle. According to Joe, he was looking for his wife so he could kill her and her boyfriend. The following is part of a confession letter he wrote in prison years later. It all started back in July of 1994. I was at work. I was a truck driver. I was working overtime this one night. Then I got off and went home as I always did. But when I opened the door and turned on the light, I noticed there was nothing there. My old lady had taken everything, including my son, and left me. Her leaving was not my problem, but she took my 6-year-old son with me. She was a crack addict and a worthless piece of shit. I would have paid her to get out of my life. All she had to do was take my son over to my mother's house, and she could have had everything else and be gone. I found out about 6 months later that she had moved on the other side of town with some asshole that had her out selling her ass for drugs. They got busted for drugs and they took my son away from them for child neglect and child abuse. I had no chance of going to social services and trying to get my son back due to my past criminal record, so I took it upon myself, with the hatred I had for these two who lost my son, to go looking for them. I had found out from someone that they was going under that bridge and getting high with some homeless motherfuckers who lived under that bridge. I went there looking for them. They were not there, but the two homeless motherfuckers they got high with were down there. They were passed out on some old stinking mattress, and that's where they were when I left, except they were dead from being chopped up. That same night, I lured the first crack whore down under that bridge. I got her high and was trying to get information out of her about my old lady's whereabouts. She acted like she didn't know, so I beat the hell out of her and raped her ass and killed her. I put her in some bushes and went and lured the second bitch down there. I did the same to her as the last one, but as I was about to throw her in the bushes with the other one, I noticed an old black man down by the river fishing looking back up at me. I grabbed a steel pipe that was lying by and ran down on him and laid his head wide open. So I put the two girls and him in the river and weighed them down with rocks. That was a very busy night for me, 5 murders within about 7 hours. I washed up in that river and cleaned up the crime scene as much as I could, then left. 2.5 weeks later, I was arrested and charged with the murders of the 2 men I chopped up. I spent close to 18 months in Baltimore City Jail waiting to go to trial. The trial lasted 1 week and it was thrown out of court because lack of evidence. Once acquitted of the double murder and released, he regained his job and was allowed to move into the one-room trailer on the south side of the lot. Uniformly, his co-workers never believed him to be capable of murder. He was goofy, told jokes, and played lighthearted pranks on his friends. He was reliable, smart, and was known at work to be a problem solver, with management considering him to be a fine employee. They would say, though, that they believed drug and alcohol abuse were having an effect on his performance in the later months. In any case, he was now in the perfect place to commit the horrific acts that he was responsible for. The pallet company was at the end of a dead-end street. None of the businesses nearby were open at night, and the closest residential area was well out of earshot. July 3rd, 1994. Kathy Magaziner was hanging out at the Borderline bar with Tiny, and the two agreed to go to his trailer to do some drugs. He got her high, then raped her and strangled her to death with an extension cord, then dug a shallow grave in the wooded area nearby and buried her. In part of his statement to the jury, he said, "Now comes the person that you're here for, Kathy Magaziner. The part they left out with her was that after 6 months, I dug her skull up, washed out the maggots, and made love to it. That's sick, ain't it? She was just another piece of meat upon the street." This confession was at least partly true. He made plenty of outlandish statements that were most likely for pure shock value, with little or no truth in them. Joe eventually led investigators to the area where he buried her, and sure enough, the body they found was missing the skull. Her jawbone was intact, which was used to positively identify her with dental records. Joe said that after he pleasured himself with her skull, he put it in a box and threw it in the trash. When asked why he killed her, his response was, "Sense of power. I don't know. I got a rush out of it, got a high out of it. Call it what you want. I had no real excuse why other than I like to do it. I don't know how to describe it." He also said to the jury, "The words 'I'm sorry' will never come out, for they would be a lie. I am more than willing to give up my life for what I have done, to have God judge me and send my ass to hell for eternity. There is no excuse for the things that I have done to those people. I just enjoyed it. So I ask of you, please give me the fucking death penalty." For the murders of Kathy Magaziner and Kim Spicer, Joe got his wish and was sentenced to death. In 2000, though, his death sentence was overturned and commuted to life in prison. He was not convicted for the murder of Tony and Gracia due to a lack of physical evidence, despite his confession. In the years that followed, Joe would ultimately write letters confessing to at least 10 murders. Whether true or not, some letters he wrote would chill those who knew him to the bone. Every once in a while, Joe would set up a barbecue stand on a busy street corner, which had been confirmed in interviews with some of the patrons of the Borderline bar. He sold beef, pork, and special sandwiches. The following is one of several letters he wrote to Anthony Ciaglia, who has had many correspondences with several infamous killers. "Dear Anthony, I sure as hell am no one special. In fact, I am damn far from it. I am nothing more than what life has made me. I have made a lot of decisions in my life, and it's sad to say that the majority of those decisions were wrong ones. I am not proud of the murders I did out there. Well, to tell the truth, maybe I am a bit proud of what I did. I was a hard worker, a truck driver, a forklift operator, but it seems the best thing that I ever learned how to do was take the life of another away from them. There were several people that I killed that one might say I feel bad about, but most of them were living on borrowed time. I feel I may have done those drug-addicted crack whores a fucking favor. I definitely helped them get off of drugs, and they made damn good sandwiches for hungry people at my open pit beef stand." You asked me to tell you about that? Well, Sunday was the day when I had the barbecue stand open. Friday night I would go out in search of my special meat. I would get off work about 6 or 7, and I always made sure I was the last person on the company grounds. Then I would go hit the shower and wash the day's dirt off of me, slip on some clean clothes, and then it was time to hit the night in search of fresh young vagina. First, I would go to the Borderline Bar and Grill. I used to get my paycheck cashed in there every Friday. No one in that bar ever had a clue of what a sick, twisted motherfucker I really was. There was quite a few people in that bar who would come to my barbecue stand on Sunday to get a sandwich to take back down to the bar. They would sit there and eat it and wash it down with a beer while they enjoyed watching the football or baseball game on TV, and I would just be laughing inside. I sure as hell couldn't tell anyone what I was doing. I shit you not. When I was working that stand, it took everything I had to keep a straight face. So many times I just wanted to bust out laughing at watching these motherfuckers around me gorging on my sandwiches. The only time I would start to feel bad at that stand was when some of those people brought their kids there to eat, but Those kids love those sandwiches too, so fuck them, I would say. I'm going to do something special for you, Tony, that I would never do for anyone else. I'm going to tell you how I did it and my recipe. I would go out looking for a crack-addicted whore. Those are the best, for no one ever seems to care about what happens to them. I would approach one of these girls that I didn't think looked too bad or disease-ridden. I would take her back up to my little trailer, always late at night. You could scream your lungs out and there was no one around to hear except for me, and the screaming kind of turned me on. I tortured the hell out of those girls. They all died a very horrible death, but I always left the one I was going to use for meat, just barely clinging to life. I did this so I could take them back in the woods and strip them of all clothing and jewelry. I would tie a rope around their ankles and string them upside down over this tree limb I always used. Then I would place this 5-gallon plastic bucket under her head. I would slit her throat from ear to ear and watch the life pour out of her into that bucket. Then I would take my knife and gut her. I'd let her hang there. About 12 hours later, I would go back to where she was hanging with my hacksaw and start dismembering her. I only used the back of the arms and legs. I'm sure there was plenty of other good meat on a carcass I could have used, but I was on a time schedule and had to work alone for obvious reasons. The good point was that I didn't have to share the sandwich money with anyone. I would cut the meat I was going to use and place it in a big bowl and wash it real well. Then place it back in the bowl and fill it with cold water and about a cup of salt and red wine. I would let it marinate for about 4 hours. Then I would rinse and wash it one more time, then rub it down with pepper and a little tenderizer, and then mix it on the grill with beef and pork I was cooking and slip it into a sandwich. No one could ever tell the difference. You might get a lot of cool Christmas presents, but no one else will give you what I have just written down for you, my secret recipe. You should try it out this summer on some of your friends. Trust me, they will love it. I have to admit, Joe's letters are fascinating at the very least, not only because of the claims he made, but in the artistic way he wrote them. His handwriting was unique and even beautiful, though I hate to say it. It kind of looked like the Disney font, and he doodled cartoonish characters on the letters and envelopes he mailed them in. He was actually pretty good at it. On August 5th, 2017, Joseph Roy Metheny was found dead in his prison cell. He was 62 years old, and his cause of death has never been publicly released. So what do you think? Are his claims believable, or was he simply an edgelord who wanted to shock people to gain infamy? That will do it for episode 9. Thank you for listening. You can find me on pretty much all social media, but frankly, I'm not very good at keeping up with all of it. If you do enjoy the show, the best way you can support it is by sharing and telling friends. There's also a donate button on the website if you'd like to buy me a coffee or a roll of toilet paper. You can do so. No pressure. Until you hear from me again, goodbye.
Ladies, gentlemen, and medaholics out there, you are now experiencing a code blue right in your ear holes, courtesy of your friends at the Drunk Medical Stories podcast.
Security to the ER.
You may feel some slight discomfort in the sides of your head, where you will find your two hosts, who are definitely not doctors, discussing wild, crazy, gross, and funny medical stories, all the while being 2 sheets past a 922, if you know what I mean. This show is rated E for explicit, so mind your delicate selves and grab a drink to calm your wobbly hands. We also recommend a strong stomach, as we will be discussing the occasional graphic medical condition.
All nurses to the nurses station.
This week on Drunk Medical Stories, we're wondering why the Grim Reaper takes days off. We also have facts about near-death experiences, people falling from planes, exploding bombs in the stomach, being cut in half by a train, and much more. Oh, and by the way, the topics and issues discussed on the Drunk Medical Stories podcast do not reflect the opinions of any specific hospital or medical facility and are only the views of the hosts or guests.
Code blue.
What we discuss and or joke about doesn't in any way reflect on the care any patient is given. Any persons discussed may be fictional for comedic purposes. This podcast is explicit and listener discretion is advised.